is to make sure you guys understand or have a general understanding of what the shoulder girdle is made up of. If you're having a pain, how can you assess it, self-assess it, without having to come to me or a chiropractor or anything else for that matter. And then also, not necessarily how to treat it, but how to prevent those aches and pains from happening, and then also manage it as you continue, especially in the CrossFit community. When you're doing a lot of pull-ups or overhead, sustained overhead movements, you tend to have these common injuries that I'm going to talk about here in a second. Okay? What I did want to point out real quick, it's just a little bit of a plug. This is my company, Reaction Rehab and Sports Performance. So I can assess you outside of this gym in my own personal office. Should you guys have any type of injuries and you want me to look at it, with you guys it's completely free, but any athlete or anyone else outside of that, that would be different, and we'll talk about that later. So, as mentioned, we're going to talk about the basic anatomy and physiology of the shoulder. Not anything too crazy. We're not going to go down into the nerves, ligaments, but I am going to talk briefly about the muscle bellies that make up, again, the shoulder girdle. Again, common injuries, how you can assess it, talk about the exercise, and last but not least, if y'all have any questions, I'll try my best to answer them. So let's get right into it. There's several joints that make up the shoulder girdle. Does anyone know how many shoulder joints, or how many joints make up the shoulder girdle? Estimate. Good guess. 3. Okay, so you have the shoulder girdle. The complexity behind it is that of the amount of joints that make up the shoulder girdle. There's a 4th one, but it's not a true joint. It's an articulation, and we'll talk more about that. And it's actually crucial to the movement of your shoulder. Okay, so the first one that I want to talk about is the bread and butter of the shoulder girdle. It's known as the glenohumeral joint. It's a common one. You have the humeral head that sits inside that glenoid cavity. Now, this has a super cool pointer, but it doesn't show on the actual screen. But if you look at let's talk about screen right, you can see the bone right here. There's a humerus, and it's kind of labeled for those of you who can't see it, but it's humerus, and then you have the concavity of the glenoid. And what happens there with that articulation, you have dynamic and static stabilizers. This is where the injury prevention really sets in this joint, okay? So we're gonna talk first about the static stabilizers, and it goes, you peel back the muscle bellies, and then you have these ligaments. This is typically where you're gonna see a lot of the impingement, and if you're not doing what we did in the past here at 925 with Bulletproof or any version of a warm-up to make or to facilitate good shoulder movement, typically that's what gets impinged if the muscles from the dynamic stabilizers are not working. Are you guys following? So we have ligaments that statically keep your shoulder in place, and then you have these dynamic stabilizers, these muscle bellies that will dynamically stabilize your shoulder. So when you're doing overhead press, pull-ups, handstand push-ups, these ligaments will keep it from popping out. These will keep them stable, which they do the same thing, but you got to make sure that those muscle bellies are firing appropriately to make sure that shoulder doesn't move. Y'all following so far? Good. The coolest thing about this joint is that it's multi-planar. So you can do like the air guitar, you can do this motion. It's really neat. That's why it's super important to keep them healthy if you want to continue to do the air guitar or handstand push-ups in this case. Pull-ups, handstand walks, bear crawls, all that fun stuff. The more you make these muscle bellies right here go to work as a team, the better off you'll be. You have 4 of them, and a really cool way to remember it is going to be sits. So supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and then subscapularis. 4 cool muscles. Okay, so teres minor and major, but they all sit back here. All right, so just making sure you understand the importance of those ligaments, and then the muscle bellies are really going to make sure that you can tolerate all of those movements without pain. Everyone cool on that part? Mm-hmm. Awesome. So now moving on from the G8, from the glenohumeral joint, let's talk a little bit about what those muscle bellies are avoiding. They're preventing this subacromial space, which I talked about briefly. You have the I did not talk about it. You have the humeral head and you have the glenoid cavity, and there's a small space that makes up that joint, the GH joint. Not makes it up, but that's what lives there. And if we talk about poor posture, what happens there is as you look at forward head, rounded shoulders, which you can see a really good depiction of it, that's why I posted that picture. What happens is you start decreasing that space where these muscle bellies run through. This is the subacromial space right in here. You can kind of see it. It's super small. If I had like a pointer, I would do it. But that middle space. If you stand with poor posture, you start closing it down, and then those muscle bellies start getting impinged. Does that make sense? So the more you stand with poor posture, or the more you're working in front of a computer or anything like that, this motion for 10 minutes, you're closing down on those muscle bellies, creating irritation. And the most common one, can y'all see the little muscle belly that's labeled? Nobody?
Yes.
Yeah.
What can you read it for me, Crystal?
Supra.
Yes, thank you very much. You were so close. So that muscle belly is the most common muscle to be impinged. You will feel that, or you will hear most common in the gym. It hurts right here. That's the muscle belly that we're dealing with, and it's not just from working out so extensively. It's not just from trying. It's not just from lifting heavy. It comes from all the outside activities that you're doing. You may not be aware, like when you're cooking or on the phone, for example, the minute you close that down for any length of time beyond 30 seconds, it's been researched that you start impinging that muscle into that tendinous junction. I'm going to use this thing. It's really cool. You can see the little baby pointer, and you can't really see anything up there. So thanks, Ben. So that right there gets impinged. So let's talk a little bit more about that. We talked about the posture. We talked about how it closed down, right? And then the muscle bellies that are there to help fire, to keep that space open and keep it moving well. We talked about all those 4 muscles, okay? That's the basic understanding to make sure that you avoid that impingement. Okay, so what muscle belly gets impinged most commonly, Hunter?
The
supraspinatus.
Supraspinatus.
You don't have to remember the name, but just know that if you start, exactly.
Okay.
If you can point to it,
Yeah.
we already know what muscle we're dealing with. Cool? So now leaving here, you can take that with you. You know the muscle and you know why. It's from outside activities, and then also carrying into repetitive movement without proper muscle activation. Okay, so let's move on from there. So we talked about the glenohumeral joint, and then I talked about how many joints make up the actual shoulder girdle. There was 3 plus 1, the scapulothoracic joint. So if you kind of dissect that word a little bit, you have the scapula, which is that wing that sits behind your rib cage, and then the thoracic, which is your rib cage, thoracic spine. So it's not a joint, it's just basically a muscle belly a bone that floats across your rib cage. And it only is stabilized by muscles. That's it. So if your muscles aren't activating appropriately, we're gonna feed into that problem of poor posture, going down into that impingement. Oh, I just hit the screen. Going down into that impingement phase. So it all kind of carries over. So if this scapula, which is living right in here, and it's kind of covered by those ligaments, this whole scapular muscle, if I say muscle one more time, bone, if that bone is not being properly stabilized by those muscle bellies that I just listed, you're going to start closing down on that subacromial space, and again, pinching down on that muscle right there. So the reason why I'm bringing it up is if you notice poor posture, the scapula is actually tilting forward, and we're going to go back to this picture here. You can kind of see how she's moving forward that way. All of those muscles need to be activating appropriately, so that way you can perform this movement here, retraction, again opening up that small space, and again avoiding what muscle belly to get impinged. Supraspinatus, that's awesome. As long as you guys are interacting with me, I know you're kind of paying attention. I want you to make sure you leave with knowing something more than what you do now. So we're talking about the muscles that make up the scapulothoracic articulation, not so much a joint. And you have all of these muscles that are there to help activate that posterior chain, and in fact open up that subacromial space, have better posture, and be able to actually facilitate proper movement. So if you can get all of these posterior chain muscles to activate as one, we're on the right track. So it's a simple standing up straight, pinching your shoulder blades. All of my posterior chain muscles are activated appropriately, and now we can safely move through overhead press, through a sustained overhead press for as long as you need until your muscles fatigue. Something super simple as pinching those shoulder blades can get all of these cool muscles to work for you. So when you slouch, you put them on stretch, impinging that area, and again, really putting that unnecessary stress on that supraspinatus that helps stabilize that glenohumeral joint. Is everyone kind of still tracking with me a little bit? Cool. All right, so we talked about 2 joints. What was the first one?
The GH joint.
Oh, you're awesome, Hunter. And the second one is up there. And it's not a joint, it's an articulation, but I think it's super imperative to understand the muscles that are stabilizing that scapula. It's going to help facilitate proper movement. So let's move on. I already talked about this, but I did want to highlight it a little bit more. It's not only the tendon that's being pinched, you also have a bursa that lives there, and then you also have this bicep tendon that comes across that joint. It's such a small space, but you have 3 really important structures that can get pinched and then create more pain. Okay, so if you're talking about this subacromial space that again is super imperative to ensuring that it keeps it open, then we should be fine. There shouldn't be any impingement happening. The unique thing about that subacromial space is it's only I believe it's like 1.5 millimeters. So you imagine these little muscles that run through there. If you slouch down even a little bit, you're pinching down on it. So anytime we talk about standing or sitting upright, making sure you're pressing appropriately, pinch those shoulder blades, you have appropriate muscle activation, you're avoiding shoulder pains just by sitting up. Really, really simple. Cool? So special tests that you can do on your own. We'll go through these really briefly. Mears is actually the doctor that's founded this subacromial impingement. He founded it in 1970. Just a fun fact. And what you want to do is go ahead and do this with me. Everyone point your thumb down, and I just want you to bring your pinky to the sky. And if you have any type of discomfort, there might be some impingement there. Okay? Really simple. Just thumb down and come all the way up. Perfect. So, if you have pain, let me know, but not right now.
So it would be pain that we're
It would be pain that you had been experiencing when lifting or something like that. Are we all cool on that? Right. Discomfort's okay, but if you feel direct, sharp pain through here, this area again where that supraspinatus lives, we might have some discomfort. Cool? Hawkins test, this one you might have to have a partner do, but I'm just going to have you do it on your own. Everyone assume this position like so, and then with your other hand, just push down. Beautiful. And I will say, it can be uncomfortable, right? The minute you push down, you might feel some discomfort right here, but you're literally putting that muscle in a vulnerable position. So, if you didn't have pain before, don't worry about it. It doesn't mean you have a damaged supraspinatus. What it means is that if you do this motion repetitively, again, you're going forward and you're pinching down what space? Subacromial space. Nicely done. Okay? So that space there, if you close down on it, you're going to have some discomfort. So don't do that if you don't have any pain. But I'm just giving you some assessments to use. And then last but not least is the painful arc. And if you notice, I provided the ranges. If you're right around here and you start feeling pain, actively lifting your shoulder up, everyone go ahead and assume this position for me, and lift about right here. Any discomfort? Good. As you go right here, about 90 degrees, any discomfort? And then again up here, any discomfort? All good? Perfect. So these are 3 basic ways to assess that area to see if you have any pain. Okay, some discomfort's fine, but remember, if you didn't have any shoulder pain to begin with, don't worry about it. I'm actually making your shoulder go in a quote-unquote vulnerable position. Are we all cool on those assessments? Nice. Oh, there it is. All right, let's keep moving on. We talked about 2 joints, right? We have the GH joints, the scapulothoracic. This is the acromioclavicular joint. I'm not going to dive into this very much, but right here, there's a real pointy spot, and it's called the acromion. It looks like a finger. You can push on it, and that's a hard stop, okay? That should feel uncomfortable. Don't dive into it too far. The reason why I wanted to bring this up is I personally was at the old box doing pull-ups, and I completely let go of the bar. Like, I flew off of it and landed on my shoulder thinking, okay, I pretty much separated this thing. So it's not common for us to have injuries here with this joint, but what I do want to bring to light is if you ever have an event where you land on your shoulder, we might be dealing with this joint. So you have an acromion bone, which I'm going to use this again. You have the acromion bone that looks like a finger, and then you have that clavicular distal articulation that is held together by the coracoacromial ligament. Now, these are just fancy names you don't really need to know about. It's not really pertinent. I just wanted to shine light on the joint and again of what makes up the shoulder girdle complex. So let's move on. The cool part about it is that there's 6 different ways, or not 6 different ways, but there's a 6-step progression, if you will, on how, not how you can injure it, but ways that it is injured. So if you look at type 1, it's just a fraying of the ligament that lives there that I talked about, and then it completely rips on type 2. Type 3 is very common. That's where you land on it, and then you can see a deformity, okay? And then let's just move on to type 4. It gets more pronounced where that clavicular head really sticks out. And then by the time you get to, well, this is 3, these 2 are 4, and then 4, 5, and then lastly 6. It's just a progression of how bad it can get, 1 through 6. How pertinent is it for you guys to know that? Not very, but again, shining light on it. And then the most common one is type 3. And the way you can encounter this injury is falling directly on it. And for me personally, if you feel like you're gonna let go of the bar through the motion, just let it go. Don't fall back or anything like that. Cool? So just a joint to let you know, again, that makes up the shoulder girdle. Special tests. These are very, very easy. The biggest one is if it hurts not here in front of your shoulder, but literally on top. When I was talking about the acromion, it's gonna be right here. You have any pain that lives there, this is where that little finger bone is, this is where the distal part of the clavicle lives, and then right in the middle. If you have any pain there just with palpating, which most of us don't, then you might have a little bit of irritation, okay? This is called the O'Brien's test. That's to suspect both labral, which makes up that glenoid cavity, and a little bit of the AC joint. So humor me, position your hand like so, thumb down, and cut across your body. Any discomfort there at all? If not, good, and let's leave it like that. All right, very nice. So let's move on to the actual bony deformity. If you actually see that the clavicular head sticking up, there might be something going on. All right, so let's move on to here. We talked about all 3, let's go back real quick. We talked about the AC joint, which lives here, okay? And we're gonna go back to the that's the impingement. The scapulothoracic joint, which lives in the back, and then our bread and butter, which is the glenohumeral joint. Those are 3 joints. One that I did not mention is the SC joint. That's the sternoclavicular joint, which lives right here. It's not necessarily gonna make or break our movement unless you have, again, a traumatic event where you fall onto your shoulder and then you have an actual bony deformity. Those are the 4 joints that make up your shoulder girdle. So you can see the importance of making sure that those muscles, these 4 muscles are imperative to ensuring proper shoulder health, okay? So going forward, make sure that you simply work on these basics. Pinch your shoulder blades to activate the entire posterior chain to ensure that you're not pinching down on what we just learned, that subacromial space, which is incredibly tiny. So the minute you lean forward, it pinches down and then it starts creating irritation. So we can avoid shoulder impingement by basically standing upright. If you don't get anything from this, then you should get that. Cool? All right, so any questions so far on the 4 joints that make up the shoulder girdle complex? Everyone has a general understanding of the actual muscle bellies that help stabilize it, right? You don't need to know the names, that's not the intent of today. The intent of today is just to make sure you understand the complexity of it and the importance, of those muscle bellies firing as a team, okay? And something I didn't really talk about before I move on to the actual dynamic warm-up and the injury prevention exercises is if one muscle belly isn't working appropriately, like say for example, you start feeling that impingement in the supraspinatus, that common muscle that gets pinched, that means it's not working for us. So we gotta do exercises to help strengthen it and again, make that subacromial space free again so you can make those muscles move appropriately. Cool? So with that being said, what I put together, my team and I, is a basic dynamic warm-up that a lot of you guys have already been doing and you have been exposed to it, coaches especially. This is called my dynamic warm-up. I wanted us to go through it, but for the sake of time, I'll just kind of take us through it briefly, The first one is really simple. You want to address your thoracic spine because that kind of coincides with the scapulothoracic region that I talked about. It articulates on those ribs. So if your ribs are stiff, that means that scapulothoracic, or that scapula is not going to be moving appropriately. So what I did here, you just want to position it right in that mid-spine, somewhere in there, and roll for about, I put 10 times, so you go up and down, that counts as 1. Cool? And then working our way down. This one we don't really do here very much, but with the PVC pipe that I don't have, all you want to do is extend backward. You're good. All you want to do is extend out and back, and again, it's opening that, oh, thank you. it opens that subacromial space. It stretches those muscle bellies that are living there. So if you look at it, you're just positioning your hands like so, and then you're extending out. Okay, just like so. And you want to pause there for about 2 to 3 seconds. You want to do 5 on each side. Cool? So let's move on. These we've been exposed to. It's going to be, I put 2 of them. Around the world, that's kind of what we decided to call it. I don't really know what is that, but it's here. Get in a comfortable snatch position, and then you just want to take it over, and back. Cool? The time the amount that I have there is roughly 8 times. This dynamic warm-up shouldn't take you more than 10 minutes at best. If you stick to the regimen, you should get through it pretty quickly. Okay, so you have around the world, you have figure 8s. This one we're very familiar with as well. All you're doing is taking it around, okay, just like so. And then you go the other way. The band pull-aparts are my favorite. That one specifically fires that posterior chain. And that posterior chain is crucial for what? Sitting upright. I knew you guys were going to say it. It was at the tip of your tongue. I felt it. I really did. So it's really simple. Grab the band, open up, and pinch those shoulder blades. Okay, humor me. We have the crossover symmetry bands that live there. Grab one and just open up. Okay, what that's going to do is I like to call them shoulder primers. You want to go here, pause for a brief second, bring it back in. 15 of them. This one is a really good one. And Emma, are you bringing a band?
Yeah.
Oh, she's awesome. This one is another good one because if you can activate these lats that live down here, you're going to go into a Y position like so, and you can side profile me. The unique part about this one is that you need to lift off. Don't just go here. You want to go up and then press back. That's okay. Thank you very much. Put it around those wrists like so. Okay, you want to get really good at the YMCA with this one. Okay, so you start right here. You build tension, and then you're going to open up, press, and you want to be against the wall, and then push back. Okay, now if we're doing overhead activity, overhead squats, you can go here, Y, press back, and then squat down. I didn't warm up, but okay. All right, so let's move on. Those are 15, and I can print out these. Actually, I'll have the dynamic warm up available. I want you guys to just keep it in your pocket, throw it away later, just not here. So I don't okay.
Or you could just email.
I could just. Oh yeah. So I will never know if you threw it away. And this one is again a little.